So right there, we all started learning, wait a minute, it's not just what we're doing here and today. It's to think about what might be done in the future, what we also might be asked to do. But it is, how do you plan for the unknown with what you have available today and make it routine, make it a mindset, make it a culture.
Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, presented by Minky Couture, where real people share real-life experiences and the tools they've developed to move forward and live their best life. I'm Michelle Scharf.
And I'm Jennie Taylor. And what I love about Minky Couture is there's not just one style of amazing blanket. There are several. You have the kind of stretchy, the big, the little, the thicker, the thinner. You can have it with the satiny edges or just the soft middle. Whichever type of cuddle up you enjoy the most, they have one for you, and you can check them all out in their stores. There are 6 of them here in Utah. Or, of course, you can always buy online if that's easier for you. minkycouture.com. And we are here in a room with my good friend, Colonel retired Gary Harter. Gary, thank you for joining us today, sir.
My privilege.
We've got Gary, who, by the title you heard, is a military man with a background of many years of service in the United States Army, but also serving now in a different capacity, but very connected. So, Gary, introduce yourself. Tell us maybe what your job title is at the moment, and then we want you to kind of get a little bit into the backstory while teaching us what you've learned about resilience through your service.
Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you, for having me here today. I currently serve as the Executive Director for the Utah Department of Veterans and Military Members throughout the state of Utah. And prior to that, I served in the Governor's Office Economic Development for about 7 years, always working with the military. I was honored to serve in the United States Army for 25 years, retired as a colonel. My last duty station, I was the commander out at Dugway Proving Ground. And when I came into GOED, they brought me in to kind of help build in the defense and the military and even the aerospace industries within the state of Utah. Became a managing director in the Governor's Office, Economic Development, worked with a lot of different industry sectors, small business programs, international, rural programs, innovation, and many others. And then in 2013, Governor Heber wanted to put the military with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and there was an opportunity, and they did that. So our department today has 3 main areas for it. We have veteran services, where we help veterans, the 150,000 veterans we have in the state, be able to connect for employment and education and healthcare and camaraderie and recognition and homelessness and suicide prevention as well. We also have a second side that we have 4 state veterans homes that provide skilled nursing care for veterans across our state. We have a state cemetery. Those 5 facilities fall under our department. And then military affairs, where we do a lot of the work of the state in interacting with our active duty bases. Hill Air Force Base, my old command out at Dugway, 12 Army Depot, Fort Douglas on the reserve side, and then we coordinate daily with the Utah National Guard as well. So I've been doing this now in the department since 2013, so I'm in my 11th year. Proud to be a member of Governor Cox's cabinet, as I was with Governor Heber before that.
So, Gary, you said you had 25 years in the uniform, and you're almost 20 years outside of it between these 2 different governor or government positions. Tell us what resilience means to you.
Yeah, I think we were chatting a little off air on it. Resilience, I learned a lot of great skills while I was in the military. First time I wore a uniform was 1976 at ROTC. Now, I got commissioned 4 years later in 1980, but my trainers were Vietnam veterans. They were the ones using their experiences and training through all of them. And then as I got in the service, my 1st Battalion commander and S3 in the Armor Battalion, they've both been chopper pilots over in Vietnam, and many others, senior enlisted, NCOs, many of the company grade officers and on, all had Vietnam experience. And all of us learned so much from them. We learned to look at a situation and understand what that is. And before that, I'd often look at something and say, okay, our mission is to go do this. And they would say, no, your mission is to do that. But you got to understand, once you do that or don't do that or aren't able to do that, you have to be able to be ready to do everything else after that. And through my military career, I always wanted my young officers and my non-commissioned officers for them to understand, you had something that happened real well. That's terrific. It's supposed to happen well. You mean you've done the training and you've done everything. But what you need to really be able to do is to understand what happens if that resource doesn't show up, or you get something taken from you, or you get told you got to do something different that you weren't necessarily prepared for, or where you thought you only had to do this little bit, it turns out you need to do that little bit and continue on with the mission. And I learned that from those folks from Vietnam, the things that they had done, and they helped us to better understand that. There's a famous, for those of us who were young lieutenants, we were standing on a battle position that we would have occupied if the East ever came across the borders over in Germany. The first unit I was in was an armor battalion in Germany with a border mission. And we stood there on this battle position, or planned battle position anyway, and our battalion commander, the young company commander, and all us young lieutenants, we were standing there listening, and he was going through. And they said, well, what if they don't ever come through? What if we were, famously you heard about the Fulda Gap. We weren't in the Fulda Gap, we were a gap to the south of that one. And they said, what if they come through? He looked at every one of us and he said, then we do our next mission, it's attack. We had never thought at all that we would go forward. And so right there, we all started learning, wait a minute, it's not just what we're doing here and today. It's to think about what might be done in the future, what we also might be asked to do. And we had the best of America's youth in our units. And he was telling us we had the responsibility to make sure that they were trained well, resourced well, and can move forward to do whatever they needed to do. So that was a lesson that I learned many, many years ago in 1981, 1982. And that 40-year plus old lesson stays today as we go through, to really look at what you have. Look at your current situation. Think of all the things that you would need to do. What if it got worse, I guess I can say, than you thought it would be? How would you respond to that? And what if more gets put on your plate? And as officers and NCOs in the military, that's what we're always looking to do. You can think, man, this went great, and reflect on that for about 30 seconds, but you need to be thinking about what's the next thing that I need to be doing. If I committed my reserve, and even in today, my reserve can be money, it can be people, it can be focus of me. If I need to commit that in one thing, how do I reconstitute that to get it ready to commit in the next thing, and something I may not even be planning for and thinking about right now? And so we talk about resiliency. We have, in my department right now, I have an installation resiliency program coordinator looking at things to make sure that the military mission on a physical, the land in our state, we're very proud of the military missions that are performed within the state of Utah, be they Guard, Reserve, Active, be they Air Force with Hill, be they the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, everything that we have, how those missions are done. But we know a lot of them takes land, and we have an installation resiliency officer, and what he looks at now is some provisions that were made available to us from the legislature last year, and some other things we're working on this year to make sure that we can stay resilient as a state to continue to support the military mission. So we actually use that word in my department right now for what we currently do, and we don't even know what we're going to be asked to do in the future, but we want to be forward thinking in what we do.
Yeah, that's the great unknown, and particularly in a military setting. What might the next generation of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and guardians be asked to do? How do you train for that? How do you prep for that? How do you keep your mind in that? I've got to live in today, but I've got to constantly be vigilant about what unknown might happen tomorrow. And Michelle and I, that's real life out of the uniform too, right? I got to try to tackle the stress of today, but I've got to be ready to pivot on a dime. And I think that really is the resilience, to be able to say, I'm going to focus on this, but should I need to focus on that, I've got to be ready to adapt. And that's maybe easier said than done, whether you're in a uniform or not.
Yeah, and there was about 20, 30 years ago, we started getting more into like financial planning in the country. We talked about, and in many respects, that's a resilient thing. Do you have enough money for your life, what you want to do, and after you retire, the whole bit. So maybe that was resiliency before we even were thinking that was the word we wanted. And the things I talked about, standing on that Bravo Hill is what we called it, along the inter-German border, staying up there with our battalion commander, that word wasn't even used at that time, but that's what he was teaching us all the time. And when we would do our exercises with him, and a succession of units and organizations I was in after that as well, what is it? What are you really looking at? So I think some of it was, maybe some of the financial things that we looked at. We didn't, like I said, didn't call it that at the time, but it is. How do you plan for the unknown with what you have available today and make it routine, make it a mindset, make it a culture overall? Like I said, the military taught me lessons. Hopefully I was able to provide some insight into some of those that I've dealt with along the years as well. And I said, not just looking at the here and now, but looking at what the potential can be. And in business, certainly in business, working over in the governor's office, economic development, I had the opportunity to work with a number of entrepreneurs, and with the entrepreneurs coming in and with their ideas, and they're putting real money on the table, not with us, but with whomever their investors are, to look at those things too. And they're looking at all the different types. What if it goes to the left, it goes straight ahead, to the right? Nothing goes straight ahead. We all know that. There's always versions of that journey that get you where you want to be. But they always had to make sure that they were looking at how they could potentially respond to a changing regulatory climate, a changing need, a changing customer, a changing distribution network, whatever it would happen to be, and a price point, whatever those are, as well, to make them successful. We're very, very fortunate, like I said, within my department, when we talk these types of things, I have that culture, that military culture. And we have it both non-commissioned officer, senior, junior, enlisted, all the different services all coming together. But there is a culture, and Jennie, you know it well, there's a culture that you get within the military of how to approach things, and then you move forward with it. But in the end, when we step back, and there's a number of different other organizations I'm involved with, that resiliency is the thing at the end of the day that many of them talk about. One of them talks about cascading types of events. And just thinking about that word, cascading type of events. So you thought this, but then you got this and this and this and this and this. And I don't think that's different than a lot of people deal with in their own lives right now, especially single households, that they try to work through all these different types of decisions. And the decision cycles that are being made today are so much quicker than the decision cycles that were been made years ago. I mean, in the military, we talk about getting inside the decision cycle of whomever your enemy is, right? Mm-hmm. Now, taking that out of the military into, every day, there's so many different, you used to have a lot more time to think through things. And you talk to some of people even older than I am, and they talk about being in thought daily and going through things. But our younger generation, we live
at such a rapid pace. Yeah. We were with some students earlier today on a tour up at the Capitol and talking about political terms and how long you're elected for. And I just said, I think in George Washington's day, a 2-year term in Congress was probably a lot longer than a 2-year term in today, where you're right, we're making not just faster decisions, we're making quicker decisions. Are we able to be thoughtful? Do we have the time to really weigh it out? Are we making so many decisions at once that they cascade into each other? And who knows if we've been able to even see the decision process from a lot of angles. So you bring up a good point that in the military, especially in today's global climate, you've got to be ready for whatever cascades.
Right.
So my question for you, Gary, is, did you learn this culture because you joined the military, or did that culture already kind of exist in you and that's what drove you to join the military? Back up to pre-ROTC. How did you get there in the first place?
I grew up in
well, you had to be 12, 14 when you joined the ROTC.
So you're very kind to me.
He's already 20 years into his second career.
The math in my head. I'm like, this doesn't add up.
I grew up in an Italian family back on the East Coast. And you see me kind of gesturing. We talk with our hands. We interrupt. We might say things that are inappropriate at many tables, but that's just the way it is. You're loud, and the whole.
I always
now
thought
you've
I was
landed in
Italian
Utah.
my entire life for all of those reasons, and I got my DNA done, and it's only like 5%.
You're like, that is totally
And I'm
wrong. I'm
like-
going to petition it. I'm going to petition
I'm
it.
like, I want that redone.
You know, and
History of military service in your family, or where?
two uncles in World War II.
Which was common for the generation, but not
it was. That was the
necessarily
60s, 70s.
a family tradition.
No, wasn't. I mean, candidly, I went in ROTC because I was looking for a way to pay for college. My family was not a family of means, but if I wanted to go, I was going to have something, big
Find a way.
scholarships or whatever. So ROTC, and I was absolutely, at that time, the commitment, and I should know, but I don't know what the commitment in today is. It was 4 years, 2 years in reserve, and you were out. And I was definitely one of those. When I do my commitment, I'm out. But when
Famous
I did,
last words 25 years later.
You know
Plus
how
a second career still.
Yeah, right.
Pseudo-military.
But, you know, we all see things. We don't know when we're just starting out on that journey, whatever that journey is, where that will take us. Some are all set that I'm going to retire in the military. Some were all set like me, that I'm definitely getting
Going to do the
out
bare minimum and
get
go
out.
forward.
But in anything, you find, however long it takes, you usually find somewhere that you find the path that suits you. And I found it for so many different reasons that I fit. And I fit in, the military fit for me. Now, certainly, Jennie, you've chatted with a lot of senior folks. There's still sometimes as you go through your career, you're like, maybe now is the time to off-road and get out of there. But those initial things that I met, the great leaders, the mentors that I had, and I talked to a number of my friends, they're lieutenants from those early days. We still communicate. 40 years later, we still communicate with each other on things. We all felt the same way. So many of those things I learned, they may have been there somewhere, but they certainly were really drilled in. Military service is a good way of drilling things in. And I identify as a former military. I identify as a veteran. Now, as Jennie pointed out, and we talked, I have a position that, that's very, very helpful in it as well. And I have the opportunities to talk to a lot of military, currently serving, former military, family members, supporters of military as well. But it was more the former on that. The military is the one that drove through. Now, my family, they know it. They know how I do. I'm a planner. I plan for contingencies. I do it. I write lists. And the whole bit. Those are things I learned in now lists were from my mom. My mom
Who
did
doesn't
lists.
love a good list?
I know,
Can we
right?
just give a shout out to
I
the
know,
list
right?
makers?
I love a list.
Yeah.
If you're
The
listening
best part of the list is crossing the thing
off the list. If you are listening today, I would love for you to go to wherever you are on social media and message us and tell us your favorite list app. I am currently in the market for a very good time task management app beside just the default on my phone. So I'm putting in a little plug. The list maker meets the military. That's like a match made in heaven to be able to have order and taskmaster.
I got a different story on it. I'm involved in community theater, and Jennie, I think you know that.
What?
Right? I remember first learning about this. We're going to have to, he lives in Heber.
Heber Valley. I live
The
in
Heber Valley. We are going to see a show. How many retired Army colonels that have cabinet positions with the governor do you know that participate
I
in
want to know.
community theater?
I want to go.
Let's hear a little more,
it's called
Gary.
Timpanogos Valley Theatre, and I'm now on the board, and I take care of the facility itself, and it's a small little theater. It's a social hall with the old sprung floor. We shored that up in about 14 years ago, and we do plays and stuff. We have a stage we built in there. But this past Saturday, which we do many Saturdays, we have work days, and I write up the big list on the whiteboard. And whomever completes it, they love going over to check it off. And there's some, they take photos after we don't quite get them all done all the time because my lists are pretty big, but they put them all down, but they all know what needs to be done, what we're looking to get accomplished. and it works out real good. And when we do get them all done, we all stand around. They take a big picture
of the
list with the check marks on it.
Okay, let's talk for a second, because I think this can be a tool of resiliency.
Yeah.
A couple of things you've mentioned. One is the theater involvement, something with the arts and creativity that can help with resilience, but also the idea of making a plan in bite-sized chunks that you can approach.
Yeah.
So talk about resilience and work and task breaking
that's
it down.
That's a great point, Jennie, because and if I go into this, and we just, before coming down today, we were just doing a risk assessment, looking at the notes and things we do, and that's exactly what we did. We went through with the risk assessment and say we might have a risk for whatever it happens to be, and here's the 3 or 4 things that we're doing. 1 or 2 were already completed because we were looking at it for this past year. And what do we need to do for it? Because you're right. What we're talking about, the resiliency, the big things that you're looking at doing, but you can't get it all at once. You have to have it, or it gets so overwhelming.
The tool of being able to break it down.
Yeah. Because if you see it something that's so overwhelming, you won't even
No.
Human nature, for most people, human nature is, well, let me get the easier ones done first, because that one's so daunting.
Well, and even
overall.
sometimes human nature will be, I'm just going to work really hard and really fast. And if I keep working really hard and really fast, surely I'll get some progress made. But the power of taking a task or a struggle or a challenge or something and breaking it down into identifiable
it's huge
pieces, because now I can organize my time and my energy. Like you said, my resource might be my focus. That can be a resource, my money, my time, my talent. And if I know where to put it, because I've broken it down, I think that goes back to what you said. Sometimes we live in such a hurry. I know I'm guilty of this. Sometimes we live in such a hurry that we're tripping ourselves, when what the resilience tool that we need might be is to slow down, break it down, whatever it is, and then be able to say, okay, here's my list of realistic pieces, rather than just, if I stay busy,
right.
I mean, that you're just spinning your wheels, and sometimes you're making yourself less resilient. You're dropping tools rather than developing and refining them.
Yeah. So this past weekend when we were doing it, we're building one particular set piece. I had 5 intermediate steps, and I tell them those steps need to be done in order, and then we'll get to the bottom and we'll have a great piece that's done. But it's not just give them, say, build this. Now, a lot of them I'm working with, there's teenagers that are helping out, and I teach a lot of them how to use tools as we go. Yeah.
But think of the lessons in that.
Actually, I had somebody that was working with one of our directors, and she often tells me her son just is down on a mission now in Brazil. And she often says, Gary, one of the greatest things you did is you taught my son how to use tools. But he now has that skill. And Tom, if you're listening, you're great. Your tools, the way he does too. But sometimes it's easier for somebody not a parent teaching, and we all know
Right.
that.
We've talked about that.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and that's a real thing.
Anything you want to teach any of my children, they would far rather not learn it from me. Whatever
Absolutely.
it is.
Yeah.
Gary, let's talk creativity.
Yeah.
The arts, whether it's theater, performing, dancing. We've talked with dancers before,
It expands
artists.
the mind. It makes you so much more effective in what you do. It's a step out of yourself. I am not an overly creative guy, and I know where my limitations are. I'm not the one that I'll just keep using some of the stuff for theater because I can relate to it. I'm not the one to say, paint this scene to be a scene. I'm more the, you want that painted green? I got it. You want it to be able to be 9 foot by 12 foot? I got it. To roll, my creativeness is more on the construction of something to make it more
rather than the concept.
Functional.
Sure.
Yeah. But I do really, I'm even doing, and I think all of us are doing things now that we didn't. And, being on stage, you got to be different things. Nobody would ever guess that I would ever be a guy up on stage. But it's a thing we did, and it fell that we moved up to a new area that we didn't know anybody. My wife saw a group was doing a thing called The Music Man. It said all 4 of us, my kids were little at the time, they said, we're going to go over and audition. We all got in the play.
You took the family.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cute.
And my wife is now the president of that same theater group now. But it is the creative things that you can do to expand how you look at a problem. I think one of the things, even with those, we're sitting around here, we're coming at it with different angles. And I think that's really the juices need to flow. And you hear one thing, wait a minute, that's a cool idea, because if we did this, wait, and then we can try that as well. I think
But it's not even just in that process of like being for whatever task you're doing at the theater. It's when you're in that task, you sometimes have the resolution come to your mind about your life or work.
You've opened that space.
Yeah, you open up the space for creativity to come at you from, almost seems like nowhere, but it's like if we don't have that sense of play or creativity or hobby where we can walk away from something and get away from it long enough for the answer to come.
And I think
true.
I think we've gotten better. It's different. Maybe it's different. Maybe it's because I've gotten older as well. I think we look for those opportunities. I know I do anyway. I look for those opportunities. I drive a lot because if you've done kind of some of the math, I live up in the Heber Valley and coming down to Salt Lake, I'm on the road quite a bit. But it is my quiet time where I can listen to the radio or turn the radio off, the music, and just think through stuff and work through stuff. They'll tell you over in the theater, there's lots of times I've redesigned things 3 and 4 times building it. But as I'm going, wait a minute, now we can do it this way or we can do it that way. But I think being willing to accept the other ideas.
There's something really powerful that comes from doing something with our hands.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That creativity of building, just the process of that, whether it's, I used to scrapbook or I used to make cards, and just that process of like layering things and moving things around and being creative, whether if you're painting something, you're painting a piece of art or whatever, it's kind of like that process. You're using a different part of your brain. You're using something else. It's like while your brain's busy over here working on this, your other side of the brain's kind of logically putting pieces together, and all of a sudden you get answers. At least it happens for me all the time.
I have found that as a member of an audience, even in a theater. I used to do some singing and performing in my younger years.
Yeah, sure.
I haven't done much as an adult, but I will tell you, I find that space when I am at a concert or a symphony or a play, where for a minute the crazy task list, this very task list that can be a tool of resilience, it gets set aside. I can maybe get lost in a different world of art or theater or music. And then it creates a room or a space for my mind to work on that task list, where if I had skipped that event and stayed home and just stressed over the to-do list, I probably might not have gotten much further than just spinning my wheels. So sometimes we do need, I think we are creators as human beings. We create life in our children. We try to create hope and opportunity. We create beautiful things in our homes or our neighborhoods. Gary, talk about with your service now, out of the uniform, but serving veterans and military and their families, what resources are available to our military and veteran populations that can help them develop those tools of resilience and or find those spaces of creativity? Because I think one thing I've seen, and Michelle and I both in the civilian world, we see military members who thrive in the uniform and then really struggle when they leave it.
Yeah, absolutely.
To create not just a thing or a painting or a picture, but meaning, create purpose in the 9-to-5 job they now have. Speak to that a little. Resilience in your current position.
I think that's a great point, Jennie, overall. We talked about all the great things that we learn while we're in the military with it, and it's that culture. And sometimes the follow-on, I guess you were saying it earlier, that follow-on after service is a tough thing to do once you're not around that. Fortunately, we've seen a lot of private organizations in Utah and even nationally, and there's some that are really channeling the physical nature.
Outdoors adventures,
Red,
hunting.
White, Blue, and a lot of those as well. And that's...
Do they seem to be very successful?
Yeah, actually, they do. We have a grant program within our department, and we were able to provide some small grants this past year, and I think 15 different groups, and a number of them were trying to do creative type things that years ago we probably wouldn't even have taken a shot at them, to be honest.
Really?
But
our culture has changed.
It has. And the VA actually has a number of programs that they're doing as well. The VA has kind of, on the healthcare side, they've tried to get around more whole health and not just coming in for what your ailment of the day is, but really saying they recognize the holistic, the entire body. And they have, yoga and all kinds of different programs that they now do as well, and more creative ones. We're seeing groups for painting and others. And it's been really interesting to see it. It's been more interesting to talk to some of the people who participated in it.
Yeah. What are you hearing?
Very positive. They really, a gentleman is a former senior commander in the Utah National Guard, was not a general officer. I'll say that. So everybody's trying to figure it out. But our former senior commander, who I know very, very well, and he's been going and doing some of them. So talking to him and some others. And, you do even have those like the National Ability Center up there. Now they deal with veterans who and currently serving who have some things they're struggling with, but they even have very broad programs because it's the whole. It's not
and
just
it's broader than I thought. For those who aren't familiar with it, up in Park City, it's an organization that at first you might think National Ability Center is only for those with physical disabilities and limitations, but they do take that whole approach.
Much broader.
Particularly in the military and veteran space.
And about 1/3 of everybody they deal with is military related.
Wow.
The state
and there's
participates in some of the
outdoor
funding.
skiing, snowshoeing,
Everything.
equestrian,
bouldering,
again, creativity
climbing
and
walls,
nature.
equestrian.
Both of those can be tools of resilience, things we can do, places we can be to exercise
and
ourselves.
I think it's part of it too. It really has, all of this, the discussion today and into the future really has broadened about what's all involved. How much is it the mind? How much it is it the physical body? How much
you can't
is
separate them.
No, you really can't. And that's one of those lessons I learned from my battalion commander in that small comment that he made over 40 years ago, standing on Bravo Hill on the border. And he took us down a path, the whole battalion, and he took the very impressionable young lieutenants, and he knew he was talking to the next generation.
For the future.
Yeah, he knew that. He knew his time in service was coming up. He was a lieutenant colonel at that time. He retired as a colonel. He's still alive. He's still down in Texas. But the impression that he made on the 20-some of us who were young lieutenants at that time, and many of us who went off to become careerists, lieutenant colonels and colonels in there, and a lot of it was for the good mentoring and him wanting to share some of that stuff with us from his experiences that he had in Vietnam and those he saw that didn't come home from Vietnam as well. And they talked to us about that as well. So,
well, you bring up such a good point that you were trained in your military experience by someone who had seen some of the worst, some very difficult things in that generation. We know to this day, the Vietnam generation, you even just say that and it brings a certain connotation of what they lived through, what they had to face, what they experienced, how many they lost of their comrades. And then to think that's your trainer and see the impact he's had on you decades later.
Yeah, it really is.
It's powerful.
And those that were there, my S3 and my executive officer, they were both 2 of our 5 company commanders. Had been in Vietnam, both as enlisted, and they became commissioned later on.
So I want to ask you a question that might be difficult to answer because I didn't give you this ahead of time. As civilians, we support what you represent, men and women in uniform.
You absolutely
We see you at the airport and we say, thank you for your service. How do we as civilians, how do we as community members, whether in the state of Utah or wherever people might be listening, how do we best contribute to the resilience of our men and women in uniform or after they leave the uniform? Can you answer that? Is there something we can do to show support?
I think for a lot of veterans, you'll hear different things. Jennie just used the term, thank you for your service. Some don't like that.
Nails on a chalkboard. I hear it all the time.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
But the vast majority, I think, do. The vast majority, to recognize the service that has been rendered. There's some of the statistics now, it's like 1%, as I think
it's less than 1% currently in uniform.
Yeah.
And about 7% still alive that have ever been in uniform. So those are some small numbers.
And so if you see somebody while they're wearing one of their hats, or you know that you're in, or it's a significant day of what, saying thank your service, most of them, if they say thank you for your service, I just said it was a pleasure to serve. And that's kind of how I'll answer it. And I think most will say that. Some words around that. But it's thanking those for the service. Now, we get into, there's lots of great organizations, as we've kind of talked about as well. If you're so inclined to get involved in some of those, either from a physical standpoint or monetary for those who need that. But I think the other pieces too, I'll be honest with you, respecting our flag. Jennie can talk about that a lot. But when they hang up the major and they do other things as well for that, showing respect for the flag. And, when I served in Germany, traveling around, the first time I was there, it was still a lot, folks. The second time, the drawdown had started. But when you went around and you saw a lot of these hills, there were small barracks there, and you saw the American flag, it made you smile. It did feel good.
It meant something.
It did. And so I still think being respectful to our flag. I served under that flag. Jennie's husband paid the ultimate sacrifice as part of that flag, and all those. But thanking us for our service, I think is still a good thing to do, and recognize that those who raise their right hand, whatever branch of service they're in, it doesn't matter if they're guard or reserve or active duty or whatever, they swore the oath to say selfless service. I will go, send me, I'm ready. And so recognizing that and, the experiences that they had, I think is meaningful.
Yeah. And something we can all do, whether it's in words or gestures or what we teach our children and grandchildren, to just be aware. I found one of the most beautiful things in my life is just to maybe ask a couple questions. If I find out someone who served, like, hey, tell me, where'd you serve? Why did you serve? How did you serve? And that just starts a conversation to a part of a story that you military members are not usually super open to offer, but I find they're invaluable. And I'll say all the time, how will my kids know what it's like to serve in the military if you're not willing to speak? But I need to take the time to ask and to really listen and to care. Tell me what you've learned. Yeah. Share with me an experience or two. Show me a photo or tell a memory. And then we've strengthened each other, right? The civilian and the military member. So
I'll tell you a quick story right on that line. Two of them. One of them, when Governor Cox first became governor, they asked all the cabinet members to come up to the Capitol, and they filmed us, and they said, tell us one thing about your department that people may not know. And I said, for me, it's easy. The stories. I said, my department, every day, whether it's somebody who's coming in who has a claim, they injured in some way in the military and they're filing a disability claim. Somebody's coming in for employment. Somebody's coming in for, they want to get connected to education. The stories our group hears who are at our nursing homes, for the residents of our nursing homes at Avalon who does our health care, or us when we're in there as well, from the families of the ones who are laying to rest at our cemetery, the stories that we hear are unmatched. I said, that is one of the greatest things.
Unknowns.
I was at a service down in Delta a few years back of somebody who had recovered remains from the USS Oklahoma that was killed at Pearl Harbor when it rolled over. And they had finally identified the remains. They recovered them a number of years ago, but the new DNA, several years, they were able to positively identify. We were at the Delta Cemetery. He was being laid to rest. They actually had a marker there already in the cemetery that had been up for many, many years ago. I was standing there at the service, and there was a Korean War veteran with his hat in a wheelchair next to me, and I knelt down to talk to him. And I talked to him, and there was a younger gentleman, a little younger than me, maybe my age, standing next to him. But I knelt down and talked to him for 20 minutes and just listened to a story. I asked him, sir, I see you're a Korean War veteran. And we went through. He told me stuff. I got up. It was his son who was standing next to him. His son turned to me. He had tears in his eyes. And he said, I heard things from my dad that he told you that
I've never heard.
Never heard before. Yeah. His son had not served. I had. Maybe it was that connection.
So sometimes we just need to ask.
Maybe it was the day. Yeah. But, because they were standing there and he had known the person who was being laid to rest. He had known him in his youth.
So many years.
I don't know.
Wow, Gary, I wish we had hours and hours to keep talking because I know you've got more stories to tell and experiences to share, but thank you. Thank you for teaching us what the military has helped you learn about resilience. To our audience, I'm going to put out a special plug. If you are listening and you either have served or are serving in the military or know someone who is, we would love to hear your story. I mean, of course, we want to hear everyone's story of resilience, but after Gary's conversation today, let's put in a special plug to hear from those of you who have served or are serving, because you have experiences that are different from the civilian sector and they can have great value to those of us in the civilian sector. And we would love to hear your reflections on that because we learn and we are strengthened by that. So thank you, Gary, for being willing to share. And just a quick call for anyone willing to be our next guest and come tell your story, large or small. Every story has that meaning and that potential to uplift those who hear it. Thank you again, Gary. Thank you to everyone for listening. Go find us on your favorite podcast platform and give us a like, a rating, and review. As always, thank you to Minky Couture, our fabulous sponsor, and to our producer, Kellyanne Halverson, here in studio with us.
Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles others are dealing with in their lives. Have a great day.